They said the new chief executive officer was a visionary. What they did not say was that his vision did not include anyone over 45. He arrived on a rainy Thursday, 18 minutes late to the all-hands meeting we were told to treat as historic. There was no apology, just the confident click of polished Italian shoes down the hallway and the hushed tension of people trying not to stare. Julian Vance, our new leader, our disruption incarnate, was barely 38 years old. He wore a sharp, asymmetrical haircut, a suit tailored too tightly, and an expression that clearly said he had already made up his mind about us. He did not shake hands, he did not smile at the reception staff, and he did not ask a single question during the chairman's 15-minute preamble. Julian just stood there, scanning the room as if taking inventory of outdated stock. By the time he reached the microphone, he was sporting a wide grin. But the warmth failed to reach his icy eyes. He announced we were entering a new era, one that valued speed, youth, and reinvention. He proclaimed he was there to build a future-ready company, and that ruthless transformation started today. Every person older than 45 visibly tensed. I sat in the second row, my faded corporate name badge hanging crooked. My department lead, Sylvia, leaned in and whispered that things were going to be rough. She had no idea how bad it would get. By the end of that first day, Julian had visited 7 departments unannounced. He asked rapid-fire questions but waved off the answers halfway through. He rearranged whiteboards without context and reassigned 4 project leads simply because he did not like their energy. He skipped our international translation team entirely. It was not that I expected him to understand what we did. We were not flashy, and we certainly were not loud. But we handled the company's most delicate client relationships, particularly our long-standing partnerships in the Gulf. I was a 54-year-old veteran and the only fully fluent Arabic speaker in the building. I had lived and worked in the Emirates for 17 years before returning to the States, and I had personally negotiated shipping contracts with royalty. I still kept the thank you letter from a prince's legal counsel framed on my desk, but to Julian Vance, I was completely invisible. I watched him from behind the frosted glass of my office door. Arrogance rolled off him like cheap cologne. I had survived 5 different executives before him, but this one was entirely different. Julian was coldly calculated, and he was actively hunting to cut from the payroll. At lunch, the employee break room was significantly quieter than usual. A few brave souls tried to joke in careful tones. Bradley from the Information Technology Department joked that Julian probably owned more mirrors than shirts. Diana replied that the shirts were all exactly the same expensive monochrome brand anyway. Julian had just moved Oscar from the accounts department over to logistics, claiming it would stimulate cross-functional dynamics. I muttered that he was just trying to break functional systems so he could rebuild them in his own terrible image. They all turned to look at me in surprise. It was not often that I spoke up during the lunch hour, but something about Julian's chaotic arrival had my nerves buzzing like a live wire. Diana leaned across the table and asked if I thought our department was on his radar yet. I shrugged and told her that we were not there yet, but we just needed to give it time. They laughed nervously, using the hollow laugh people use when a dark joke lands too close to the truth. Julian's commanding voice echoed loudly from the main conference room. He was already aggressively rearranging our collective future. By Monday, the dreaded reorganization meetings had officially begun. They happened quietly and strategically. One by one, senior managers were abruptly called into the small conference room. When they finally came out, their faces were universally pale. By Wednesday afternoon, 5 different department heads were permanently gone. Martha from procurement, who had dedicated 28 years to the company, was terminated without a second thought. Oscar from logistics, a brilliant man who could accurately calculate inventory turnover margins in his sleep, was also gone. The young replacements arrived almost instantly. They were entirely fresh faces with shiny, unproven resumes. Every single one of them possessed the same chirpy energy. They proudly introduced themselves using absurd titles that no one had ever heard before. One of them asked if we could eliminate all fax numbers from our international client contracts because they made the company look ancient. Meanwhile, I kept my head down and kept working. The massive Arabic shipping deal was finally entering its critical final stretch. It was a wildly complex joint contract between four major shipping firms based in Dubai, Doha, Riyadh, and Kuwait. I was the sole person coordinating between their elite legal teams, our internal compliance officers, and an entire tangled thread of cultural protocols that could kill the $35 million deal overnight. It was never just about simple translation. It was about high-stakes international diplomacy, but nobody from the new executive team ever bothered to ask me why I was doing it, or how I managed to keep the fragile alliance together. Technically, the account was assigned to Sylvia, but she knew better than to interfere with my established process. She thought I was just helping with light translation. She did not realize I was rewriting sensitive clauses in complex Arabic legal terminology, carefully rebalancing aggressive negotiation terms to save face for all parties, and faithfully scheduling crucial virtual meetings for 4 in the morning to gracefully accommodate the vast time zones across the Gulf region. The wealthy international partners liked me, and more importantly, they trusted me. The office, once filled with a kind of quiet camaraderie and mutual respect, now buzzed with constant suspicion. The new hires floated around like expensive consultants in a failing startup, taking aggressive notes on whiteboards they fundamentally did not understand. They asked condescending questions like why we still called these profitable accounts legacy markets, and if we really needed to keep physical paper backups for compliance reasons. One particularly obnoxious new manager even questioned the structural layout of our internal file drive, asking if it could be slightly more gamified for the newer generation of employees. I truly wish I was joking about that. The absolute worst part was not their shocking ignorance. It was their unwavering certainty. They dismissed our proven systems with a condescending smile, openly called our meticulous methods vintage, and laughed at complex process sheets that had safely carried us through severe international crises and multiple industry shifts over the years. They claimed our work was entirely too manual, far too slow, and way too paper-heavy. They simply did not know we had successfully survived 3 major economic recessions, that we had outlasted much bigger competitors, and that those very manual processes had been built with specific intent to protect our clients, to ensure total compliance, and to endure global market turbulence. But Julian Vance did not care about stability. He only saw them, the young, the loud, and the shiny, as the brilliant future of the company. And the rest of us, the seasoned veterans, we were merely the old furniture still sitting here for now. I stayed incredibly late that evening, carefully drafting a heavily revised clause for a strict shipment liability agreement with our primary Qatari partner. It was an extremely delicate negotiation. A single mistranslation could falsely suggest intentional blame or cultural insult, completely ruining our carefully built goodwill. I reviewed every single word 3 distinct times before finally saving the document. My office light was the absolute only one still on when I finally stood up from my heavy wooden desk to leave. Through the frosted glass, I suddenly saw Julian's reflection lingering in the darkened hallway. He was not looking at me. He was staring directly at my silver nameplate on my office door, acting exactly as if he had just realized it was still stubbornly attached there. It was the specific kind of gray morning that felt incredibly heavy before the wall clock even hit 9. The entire office buzzed with a deeply uneasy energy. Heavy winter coats were not taken off. Hot coffee cups stayed clenched entirely too tight in nervous hands, and absolutely no one said what we were all collectively thinking. The calendar invite we had all received did not have a clear agenda attached. It just contained 4 ominous words. Company-wide structural performance review. Julian Vance stood completely alone at the front of the main auditorium. There was no cheerful slideshow presentation, no supportive co-presenters, just him and that slick, chosen spotlight that made his sharp blue suit gleam brightly like modern armor. He did not smile. He simply began by stating that we needed to be completely clear, his sharp voice cutting right through the low hum of nervous side conversations. He announced that we were aggressively entering a performance-focused phase. He said the word performance the exact way some aggressive generals say the word war. He told us that they would be deeply reviewing each department, breaking down structure, overall output, and true corporate value. He explicitly warned that absolutely no one in the room was exempt from this scrutiny. He claimed it was not about punishment, but rather about strategic alignment. Alignment was the new corporate euphemism for slow-bake mass terminations. I sat there and crossed my legs slowly, my favorite pen resting entirely untouched in my lap. Beside me, my colleague Bradley squirmed in his uncomfortable folding chair, like a man who had just realized he unfortunately did not know where the nearest fire exits were located. Julian Vance kept talking at the front of the room. He warned that we would be asked incredibly tough questions over the coming days. We were going to be ruthlessly stripping down anything and everything that no longer served the modern company's rapid evolution. He declared it was finally time to get significantly leaner and infinitely sharper. His cold blue eyes confidently roamed the anxious crowd exactly like he fully expected a round of thunderous applause. Instead, he got absolute, deafening silence. As we slowly filed out of the meeting room, nervous whispers swirled around me like a dark storm gathering over the office. I was exactly halfway back to my desk when I distinctly felt his imposing presence right behind me before I even heard him properly speak. He called out my name, asking if it was Edward. I turned around slowly. Julian was standing uncomfortably close to me, his expensive silk tie slightly askew in that highly calculated way that practically screamed casual dominance. He looked at me exactly like he was sizing up a complicated puzzle with one stubborn piece he could not quite place on the board. I replied calmly, but remained extremely cautious. He then asked me to remind him what exactly it was that I actually did for the company. There was something very specific in the terrible way he asked the question. It was not genuine curiosity. It was a harsh accusation poorly dressed in thin civility. I strongly resisted the sudden urge to tilt my head in open defiance. I told him that I managed our strategic corporate partnerships across the Gulf region, primarily focusing on the United Arab Emirates. The very next morning, I received the ominous calendar email at exactly 9:02. It was a completely simple calendar block. The invite merely read Meeting Julian Vance, plus Human Resources, Room B. There was absolutely no descriptive subject line. There was no polite explanation provided. I knew exactly what it meant. I did not bother to bring my heavy work laptop, and I did not even wear my formal blazer. I just walked straight in wearing the exact same charcoal suit. I wore the glorious day my permanent work visa was originally approved in Abu Dhabi. It was the specific suit that always made me feel incredibly sharp and undeniably sovereign. Julian Vance was already seated at the polished table, flanked closely by Sylvia from the Human Resources Department, who nervously looked at me exactly like she desperately wished she were anywhere else in the entire world. Julian offered a forced, plastic smile and thanked me for coming in, stating that they would keep the meeting incredibly brief. My heavy leather chair was already pulled slightly away from the big table, a psychological tactic that was certainly not subtle at all. Julian smoothly continued his rehearsed script, stating that, as I surely knew, they were aggressively realigning corporate resources. He officially informed me that my specific senior position was being permanently eliminated as a direct part of that overarching efficiency effort. He claimed it was absolutely not a negative reflection of my personal performance, but rather just necessary structural streamlining for the future. Sylvia awkwardly slid a thick white envelope across the smooth wooden table toward me. It contained the standard, insulting corporate exit package. Exactly 2 months of basic severance pay, basic health benefits for a mere 6 weeks, and a completely generic positive reference letter provided upon formal request. I absolutely did not reach out to touch it. Of course, Julian arrogantly added that they truly appreciated the hard work I had done for the company over the long years. He condescendingly stated that transitioning outdated legacy roles was never an easy thing to do, but they were supposedly highly confident I would easily land on my feet somewhere else. He clearly expected profound shock, perhaps a trembling voice, or maybe a desperate plea to keep my job. Instead, I stood up slowly from my chair and looked him dead in his cold blue eyes. I calmly informed Julian that we had three extremely powerful Emirati business partners flying in on Monday morning. He blinked in mild surprise and smugly replied that yes. He was already completely aware of their scheduled visit. I softly told him that no, he was absolutely not aware of the reality of the situation. I explained that those incredibly wealthy men spoke Arabic. They deeply trusted exactly one single person in this entire company. They fundamentally refused to sign absolutely anything unless I was physically sitting in the room with them. Julian deeply frowned, a fleeting moment of genuine confusion violently flickering across his polished, confident exterior. I slowly picked up the thick white envelope and tucked it neatly into my leather briefcase. I wished him good luck on Monday morning, and then I simply turned around and walked straight out of the room. I did not walk away because I felt defeated. I walked away because the arrogant man who thought I was completely dispensable had just carelessly thrown away the only person who actually understood the massive financial stakes. They would absolutely find out soon enough. The very first thing I did on Saturday morning was aggressively vacuum the dusty corners of my quiet home office. There is something deeply profound about cleaning that feels like actively reclaiming your own life, like finally washing off the dirty fingerprints of a corporate world that completely forgot your true worth. I opened the large window, let the bright morning sunlight comfortably cut right through the swirling dust motes, and pulled every single heavy reference book from the tall wooden shelf. I gathered thick legal contracts, comprehensive codes of ethics, advanced cross-cultural negotiation theory manuals, and heavy Gulf legal dictionaries. These were the essential tools I had faithfully used for 17 years. None of it had ever left my side, even when the company aggressively turned its back on me. The thick termination folder from Human Resources still sat entirely untouched on my wooden desk. I had only opened it exactly once, just enough to clearly see that familiar, infuriating sentence stating that this decision was final. That was perfectly fine with me. I absolutely did not want to go back there anyway. Around noon, I finally received the first worried text message. My former colleague Diana messaged me saying Julian was a complete fool and that they absolutely would not last a single week without me there to guide them. Then came another message from Bradley in compliance. He apologized for not saying anything in the room, but he wanted me to know. He had always deeply respected exactly how I professionally handled the complicated Emirati contracts. He told me I was the absolute only one who ever kept things from violently falling apart during tensed negotiations. Then came one more message from the legal department. They admitted they were strictly told by the new management not to talk about the sudden firing, but they simply did not care about the rules anymore. They clearly stated that everyone knew I was the sole reason the company had never been aggressively sued in international court. The deafening silence from many others unfortunately stung significantly more than I had originally expected. The next morning, I woke up at exactly 6 o'clock, not because I urgently had to, but because I actively wanted to do so. I dressed deliberately, choosing a sharp navy suit and my best tie, crafting the specific kind of professional outfit that clearly said I was only there because I chose to be, not because I desperately needed to be saved by anyone. The competing consulting firm's downtown office was incredibly sleek but very understated. It featured massive glass walls and warm ambient lighting, completely lacking any of the soulless, aggressive flash that Julian Vance loved so much. I was barely seated in the comfortable waiting area when Helena, the powerful managing partner, entered the quiet room and smiled warmly, exactly like she genuinely meant it. She firmly shook my hand twice and told me she had already read my impressive in detail. She made it completely clear that I was not sitting there to frantically prove myself to the firm. Instead, she boldly stated that I was there to carefully tell them exactly what they desperately needed to do to deserve a senior liaison of my incredible caliber. I stared at her for a brief second, not from sudden shock, but from profound relief. We talked intensely for 45 minutes. We discussed not just about the massive volume of work I had faithfully done, but exactly how I analytically thought about the complex cultural landscape. We explored exactly why deeply understanding a foreign culture was never just an optional extra, but rather the absolute deal-breaker in international business. I explained precisely how high-stakes Arabic negotiation aggressively relies just as much on strategic silence as it does on spoken words. I clarified how true respect is not found in exactly what you say, but rather in exactly how long you are genuinely willing to sit and listen to the other side. By the very end of our deeply engaging conversation, Helena did not even bother to pretend to delay the hiring process. She formally offered me the highly coveted role of lead senior consultant for strategic relations. The generous starting salary was exactly 25% above what I was previously making at the old firm. The offer included full professional autonomy, complete remote work flexibility, and a firm promise that they would absolutely not insult my vast intelligence with mandatory micromanagement check-ins. I did not even pause to consider it. I confidently accepted the incredible offer on the spot, smiling genuinely for the very first time in weeks. As I proudly left the tall glass building, my phone buzzed urgently in my pocket. It was a frantic email from my old company. The desperate subject line begged for urgent assistance regarding the Monday client meeting. I absolutely did not even open the email. They had confidently made their terrible choice, and now I had proudly made mine. Meanwhile, Monday morning arrived, cloaked in thick, suffocating tension, back at my old corporate office. They were frantically preparing for the massive meeting, exactly like it was an official royal visit. I heard all the chaotic details later, through a massive flurry of panicked text messages and one incredibly guilty voicemail. The expensive corporate catering had been aggressively upgraded at the absolute last minute. Massive floral arrangements had been rushed into the lobby, and Julian Vance himself had nervously swapped out the main company logo presentation slide 3 separate times, desperately trying to make it visually pop. What the foolish young executive completely failed to realize was that absolutely nothing about this critical international meeting actually needed to pop. It desperately needed to culturally resonate. And to successfully achieve that deep resonance, you absolutely needed complete fluency, not just in the spoken Arabic language, but in the nuanced culture, the slow rhythm, and the rigid, unspoken rules of respect. And I was already permanently gone. The powerful delegation from the Emirates arrived precisely at 9 in the morning, 4 massive black sedans with heavily tinted windows smoothly pulled up to the front doors. 2 highly senior corporate partners gracefully stepped out, accompanied closely by one incredibly stern-faced translator whom I personally knew very well. His name was Tariq, and he had once quietly told me over strong black coffee in Dubai that arrogant Westerners often speak incredibly fast while unfortunately saying absolutely nothing of value. But as for me, Tariq had proudly said, I truly knew exactly how to patiently wait and how to genuinely listen. The prestigious delegation walked straight into the main glass conference room with an incredibly calm, ceremonial grace, projecting the specific kind of heavy presence that instantly fills a large room without making any actual noise. Julian Vance eagerly met them right at the heavy glass door with his absolute most polished, aggressive grin. He loudly announced that they were deeply honored by the visit, broadly gesturing toward the head of the long table exactly like a desperate maitre d' at an overpriced trendy restaurant. He enthusiastically proclaimed that they were incredibly excited to aggressively continue building upon their MAV global synergies. Tariq, the stern translator, absolutely did not move a single muscle. One of the senior partners, a deeply respected man named Zayed, who was the absolute senior figure in the room, did not bother to sit down either. Instead, Zaid calmly placed both of his palms gently on the soft leather back of a heavy chair and firmly asked in perfect English exactly where Mr. Edward was. The incredibly direct question violently sliced through the tense room exactly like a freezing cold winter wind. Julian blinked rapidly, clearly caught completely off guard by the abrupt inquiry. Zaid turned slowly toward the other delegates and briefly spoke to them in rapid Arabic. I absolutely did not need to be physically in the room to know exactly what he was angrily saying to them. I could easily hear it in the heavy rhythm of his disappointed voice. Moments later, the entire powerful delegation stood up together in unison. Tariq gave Julian a brief nod that was absolutely not a polite goodbye. Zaid firmly announced that there would be absolutely no contract signed today, and he declared that the meeting was officially over. And just exactly like that, the large glass room rapidly emptied. There were absolutely no loud shouts, no violently slamming doors, just deafening silence and total absence. It was the specific kind of heavy silence that clearly screams you have just made a catastrophic mistake that you can absolutely never undo. By 10:30 in the morning, the arrogant young executive had officially lost the entire massive deal. Exactly $35 million vanished completely into thin air in under an hour. I received absolutely no official message from the corporate executives, but my personal phone lit up entirely all morning with frantic fragments of panicked gossip from my former colleagues. Diana texted that they had literally walked right out without signing a single page and that it was absolute total chaos in the office. Bradley messaged that Julian completely froze and could not even begin to explain what I actually did for the firm. They did not even stay for the expensive catered lunch. Sylvia reported that Julian actually desperately tried to blame the catastrophic failure on a simple language gap, acting exactly as if the powerful clients could not see right through his pathetic lies. I sat comfortably at my brand new wooden desk, happily overlooking a totally different, beautiful city skyline, slowly sipping perfectly fresh hot coffee while happily finalizing a complex strategic memo for a massive new Gulf expansion project. I absolutely did not smile, and I certainly did not gloat. But I did deeply feel something heavy finally settle comfortably in my chest. It was not exactly revenge, and it was not exactly triumph. It was just the undeniable truth. And they had finally heard it loud and clear. Even if it was entirely too late to save them, it slowly started with quiet whispers, nervous inquiries, and incredibly subtle shifts in tone during otherwise routine international phone calls. Then came the devastating official emails. One of the company's oldest partners in Bahrain coldly sent a brief message with a subject line that clearly said everything. Proposal entirely withheld pending deep clarification. That was just the polite corporate version. What they truly meant was that they had absolutely heard what just happened in the Emirates. By late Wednesday afternoon, two other incredibly long-standing partners, one massive firm in Oman and another heavily influential group in Kuwait, had officially postponed all their scheduled renewals. They did not formally reject them, and they absolutely did not try to renegotiate them. They just completely froze them indefinitely. The dark word was rapidly spreading now, echoing loudly behind heavy closed doors and swirling wildly within the elite private networks of powerful global executives and seasoned international diplomats. Edward is permanently gone. It was the specific kind of gone that actively made incredibly wealthy people deeply uneasy. Because the undeniable truth was that I had not just simply managed their profitable partnerships. I had actually been the vital structural bridge. I provided the quiet, steadfast assurance, and I was the absolute core reason those international clients ever believed our company was not just another greedy, faceless machine desperately chasing quarterly numbers. And now they absolutely did not trust the strange new voice nervously speaking on the other end of the line, primarily because it simply was not mine. Inside my old company, absolute chaos violently cracked the thin corporate surface. I heard all the juicy details entirely secondhand from desperate friends still barely hanging on by a fragile thread. I read panicked emails forwarded entirely accidentally, and I saw wild updates posted entirely too quickly on professional networks to successfully hide the deep desperation. The massive ripple effects were utterly immediate and devastating. Major international projects were permanently stalled, massive quarterly budgets were aggressively slashed without warning, lucrative legacy contracts completely evaporated exactly like thin smoke in a strong wind. The frantic emergency alignment meetings officially began on Friday morning. They ran through multiple exhausting rounds in a single stressful day, managing overlapping virtual calls and incredibly frantic internal messages. They desperately called them strategic alignment sessions, but I knew significantly better. They were purely desperate triage meetings. The arrogant new managers who had been so incredibly quick to harshly critique our supposedly outdated systems, now blankly stared at complex financial dashboards that made absolutely no logical sense to them. They desperately tried incorrectly translating highly sensitive client messages using completely automated, cheap software, and they instantly got back terribly translated phrases that actively made powerful senior executives in Riyadh aggressively raise their eyebrows in deep anger. And still, absolutely no one in the executive suite bravely admitted what was truly happening to the dying company. They had foolishly removed the absolute only voice their powerful clients deeply trusted, and they had arrogantly replaced me with a massive, unfillable gap. At my new job, things honestly could not have been more completely different. My new highly professional colleagues treated me exactly like a seasoned expert, absolutely not like a useless relic from the past.